He didn't expect the cameras to capture that moment. A billionaire, Richard Dalton, the man Forbes once called the king of silent empires, stood frozen in disbelief, staring at a single receipt lying on his marble kitchen counter. 4 black credit cards had been given out that morning. 4 women had been told the same thing. Buy whatever you want. No limits. 3 cards came back dripping in luxury, designer gowns, sparkling diamonds, imported champagne. But the 4th? The one the maid returned? It carried a purchase that cost less than $10, yet left the billionaire speechless. Richard had seen people chase money all his life, but this time he wasn't testing wealth. He was testing hearts. The irony? He didn't even believe in kindness anymore. He'd built his empire on contracts, calculations, and cold logic. Love, loyalty, humility. Those were words for fairy tales. Until she walked into his mansion, barefoot, quiet, and invisible to everyone but fate. Her name was Elena Brooks, the live-in maid who wiped floors no one noticed and served meals to guests who never said thank you. No one would have guessed that one day her single choice would rewrite the definition of rich. That morning started like every other. The mansion glowed in gold sunlight. The staff rushed around preparing breakfast. And Richard, bored of predictability, decided to play his favorite game, the test of truth. He lined up 4 women from different corners of his life: his girlfriend, his business partner, his socialite friend, and his maid. Each received a black card with unlimited credit. Each was told, "Spend as you wish. You have 1 day." It was supposed to be a psychological experiment, a little joke to confirm what he already believed, that everyone had a price. But when he saw the maid's purchase, that belief cracked. It wasn't diamonds, it wasn't clothes. It was something money couldn't even measure. And that's where this story begins, not with luxury, but with the quiet act that humbled a billionaire. Because sometimes, the richest person in the room is the one who has nothing to prove. So sit tight, story lovers. Wherever you're watching from, New York, Houston, Chicago, or somewhere far across the ocean, drop your city in the comments. Let's see how far this story travels. Elena Brooks wasn't always invisible. Once, she was the kind of woman people noticed for all the right reasons. Smart, hopeful, always helping others even when she had little herself. Born in a small town in Georgia, Elena grew up in a world that taught her to smile even when life stung. Her mother worked at a diner, serving coffee to the same men who never tipped, while her father, a mechanic, fought to keep the lights on. Money was always short. But love wasn't. Her parents believed in something money couldn't buy: dignity. They taught her that even if you wash dishes, you do it with pride. As a teenager, Elena dreamed of becoming a teacher. She loved books, kids, and the quiet satisfaction of helping someone learn something new. Her notebooks were filled with lesson plans, and her wall was plastered with cutouts of classrooms she hoped to one day have. But dreams have a cruel way of shrinking when bills grow faster than hope. Her father's back gave out after years in the garage. 1 surgery turned into 3, and the medical bills came faster than the paychecks. Elena dropped out of college during her 2nd year to help her family survive. She didn't complain. She just worked, waitressing, cleaning, babysitting, whatever kept her mother from crying at the kitchen table when the rent notice came. Years passed, like pages turning too fast. She met someone, a charming delivery driver named Mark, who promised stability and a fresh start. For a while, he kept that promise. They married, had a small apartment, and even talked about saving for her to finish school someday. But then came the layoffs, the rent hikes, and the slow disintegration of love under financial pressure. Mark changed. When he couldn't find steady work, he started drinking. Then came the shouting, the slammed doors, the empty fridge. One night he left, no note, no money, no goodbye. Elena was 27 with no husband, no degree, and a 3-year-old daughter named Lila, who thought the moon followed her window every night. That little girl became her reason for surviving. Elena's days blurred together, cleaning houses, scrubbing toilets, washing dishes for people who wouldn't even look her in the eye. But every night, she'd sit on the edge of her thin mattress, whispering stories to Lila about dreams that hadn't died, just slept for a while. There were nights when the electricity was cut off, and dinners were nothing more than peanut butter sandwiches, and laughter she forced to sound real. She learned to sew torn clothes, stretch milk for 2 extra days, and smile at her daughter like tomorrow was guaranteed. Sometimes she'd pass by a luxury store window on her way home and see her reflection beside $1,000 handbags. She'd chuckle softly to herself. Funny, she'd think. They pay that much for what I carry for free. Resilience. Her hands, cracked from bleach and scrubbing, became her silent proof of strength. Every scar had a story. Every ache was a reminder that she'd survived another day. And yet, somewhere inside her, a quiet flame still burned. She'd kept one thing from her old life, a worn-out teaching book with notes scribbled in the margins. She read it at night while Lila slept, whispering the words as if reciting a forgotten prayer. Then came the offer. A friend from her cleaning agency mentioned a high-paying job at a billionaire's mansion in Connecticut. The man was rich, cold, and famously private. Most people quit within weeks, but Elena didn't care. She needed stability, no matter how intimidating the address sounded. Her first day at the Dalton estate felt like stepping into another planet. Marble floors that echoed like cathedrals, chandeliers that looked like falling stars, and silence so heavy it almost had a price tag. The other staff avoided the billionaire's gaze. They whispered about him. Richard Dalton, the man who could buy countries but hadn't smiled in years. Rumor had it his wife left him for someone with a soul. Elena didn't care about the gossip. She just worked. She learned the rhythm of the mansion, when to dust, when to disappear, when to smile without being seen. What set her apart wasn't her efficiency, it was her quiet humanity. When the gardener got sick, she brought him soup. When the cook forgot her lunch, Elena shared hers. And when the old dog limped down the marble hallway, Elena was the only one who knelt to pet it. Little did she know, the billionaire noticed. Richard Dalton was a man who saw everything, but felt nothing. Until Elena. He started observing her quietly from a distance. The way she worked, the way she carried herself, the way she smiled through exhaustion. He couldn't understand it. How could someone with so little carry so much grace? For the first time in years, curiosity cracked through his indifference. He'd built his life testing people, partners, employees, even family, to see who would stay loyal when the money disappeared. And every time he'd been disappointed. But Elena was different. She had no reason to impress him, no agenda, no mask. That difference unsettled him and fascinated him. So one quiet Sunday morning, as sunlight spilled through the glass walls of his study, Richard Dalton decided to test one more person. Not for greed. Not for love, but for truth. A test that would change his life more than hers. It started as a simple breakfast conversation. At least, that's how Richard Dalton made it sound. The billionaire sat at his 30-foot glass dining table, staring out at the endless stretch of his private garden. Sunlight poured in, bouncing off polished silver and crystal plates. Across from him sat 3 women, all poised, elegant and perfectly aware of their reflection in his money. There was Cynthia, his longtime business associate, sharp, ambitious, always chasing the next merger. Vanessa, his girlfriend, social media royalty, fluent in selfies and sponsorships. And Marjorie, a philanthropist friend who often appeared in magazines, her smile as practiced as her generosity. Then there was Elena Brooks, standing quietly by the doorway, waiting for instructions on what to serve next. Richard looked at her longer than usual. Something in her presence grounded the room, a simplicity that didn't fit the polished perfection around her. That morning, he'd woken up with a thought he couldn't shake. What would people do if they were truly free to choose? He'd seen greed dressed up as ambition and kindness masquerading as strategy, but he'd never seen purity without motive. So, as coffee was poured and conversation turned shallow, Richard leaned back and said the words that would change everything. I have a little experiment in mind. Something fun. Cynthia's eyebrow arched. Vanessa smirked. Marjorie looked intrigued. Richard reached into his briefcase and pulled out 4 black credit cards, sleek, matte, limitless. "Each of you," he said, "will take one of these. No limits, no conditions. You have 24 hours. Buy whatever you want. Consider it an open window into your soul." The women laughed, half shocked, half thrilled. Elena froze, unsure if she was supposed to laugh, too. When Richard's gaze shifted to her, she shook her head softly. "Sir, I think there's a mistake." "I'm just the—" "No mistake," he interrupted. "That's the point. Everyone gets the same card. What you do with it is your choice." The air thickened. Vanessa looked annoyed. "You're really giving her one, too?" Richard smiled faintly. "Exactly." He handed out the cards, one by one. Each woman touched it differently. Cynthia with confidence, Vanessa with excitement, Marjorie with polite curiosity, and Elena with hesitation, as if holding something sacred. That day, the world spun differently for all 4 women. Cynthia headed straight for a high-end boutique in Manhattan. She saw the experiment as a chance to impress Richard, to show that she knew the finer things that matched his world. Vanessa posted a selfie with the card before she even used it. "Spoiled or deserving?" Her caption read. Marjorie, true to her image, made a large donation to a charity that would conveniently land her in the news by evening. Elena, however, didn't move fast. She took the train home, the card tucked safely in her pocket. She couldn't stop thinking, what would I even buy? Lila's face flashed in her mind. Her daughter's worn shoes, the light bill waiting on the counter, the landlord's voice echoing from last week's warning. For a moment, temptation whispered. She could buy new clothes, a proper home, maybe even a used car. But something in her heart said, this isn't just about spending. That night, while other women posed for cameras and champagne glasses, Elena sat at her tiny kitchen table with the card in front of her, untouched. She stared at it like it was a mirror reflecting her choices, her values, her soul. What do you buy when you already know what matters? She thought. The next day, the mansion buzzed with energy. The 3 women arrived first, each ready to showcase their purchases. Cynthia came in with luxury handbags, rare wines, and a watch worth more than most people's homes. Vanessa flaunted a closet of designer dresses, laughing for the cameras that weren't even there. Marjorie handed Richard a receipt for her charity donation, smiling proudly. It was all exactly what he expected. Then came Elena. No shopping bags, no receipts in glossy envelopes, just a small paper slip folded neatly in her palm. Vanessa smirked. Did she forget the assignment? Cynthia laughed under her breath. Even Marjorie tried to hide a confused smile, but Richard's eyes stayed locked on Elena. Well? He asked gently. What did you buy? Elena took a quiet breath. Her voice trembled, but her words were steady. A meal, sir. For someone who hadn't eaten in 2 days. Silence. She held out the receipt, $8.47, a small diner charge in a part of town no billionaire had ever set foot in. Richard blinked slowly. That's all? Yes, sir, she said. But it felt like more than enough. The room fell awkwardly quiet. Vanessa looked away. Cynthia rolled her eyes. Marjorie shifted uncomfortably. Richard said nothing. He just stared at the little piece of paper, the only one that didn't scream for attention, yet somehow demanded it. For the first time in a long while, he didn't know what to say. That night he couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Elena's words. More than enough. He realized she hadn't just spent his money. She'd revealed what money really meant, but not everyone was moved by her humility. By the next morning, whispers spread among the mansion staff. Vanessa accused Elena of trying to show off her virtue. Cynthia told Richard she thought the maid's act was manipulative, a performance. Even Marjorie, in her soft-spoken tone, hinted that maybe Elena just didn't understand the assignment. And yet, Richard couldn't shake the feeling that the only person who did understand was Elena. Something had shifted inside him, but outside the tension was growing. The others didn't like being outshined by someone they saw as beneath them. What began as a harmless experiment was quickly turning into a quiet war of pride, jealousy, and revelation. And as Richard watched from the shadows of his own wealth, He realized this wasn't about the black cards anymore. It was about what they exposed. Because when money is limitless, the truth is the only thing left with a price. The next morning, Richard Dalton walked into his boardroom. But this time, something was different. The billionaire who once entered rooms to applause now walked into whispers. The credit card experiment had leaked. Some staff had shared bits of it on social media, enough to stir gossip and mockery. "Billionaire gives black cards to test loyalty," the headlines read. But it wasn't the media attention that bothered Richard. It was the fact that the one person who should have been celebrated, Elena, was being quietly torn apart. The other women were furious. Cynthia accused her of playing poor for sympathy. Vanessa laughed during lunch, saying, $8.47? That's not virtue. That's ignorance. Even Marjorie, who'd once praised humility, called Elena a convenient saint. By noon, the mansion had become a stage of quiet cruelty. Elena could feel the judgment in every stare, every smirk. Every whispered maid thinks she's special. When she entered the dining hall that afternoon to serve tea, Vanessa spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "You know what's funny? People act generous when it's not their money." Laughter followed. Elena's hands trembled slightly as she poured the tea, but her voice stayed calm. "You're right," she said softly. "But maybe generosity isn't about whose money it is. Maybe it's about who needs it more." The laughter died instantly. Even Richard looked up from his chair. Vanessa's face tightened. "Are you saying you're better than us?" "No," Elena said. "Just that some things money can't measure." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut glass. Then Vanessa stood up, grabbed the teacup, and deliberately tipped it over, right onto Elena's tray. Hot tea splashed across her hands. Gasps. Richard shot to his feet. Enough! But it was too late. Elena quietly wiped her hands, nodded, and left the room. Her dignity intact, her heart breaking quietly behind her calm face. That evening, Richard couldn't focus on anything else. He sat in his study replaying every moment, the laughter, the cruelty, the humility in Elena's voice. He realized his so-called test hadn't exposed others. It had exposed him. His arrogance. His blindness. He called an emergency meeting the next morning. When the women arrived, they expected another elegant breakfast, another chance to showcase their charm. Instead, they walked into the grand ballroom, now transformed into a presentation space. A long table sat at the center, surrounded by Richard's senior staff and reporters. The women froze. Cameras, reporters, what was happening? Richard stood at the head of the room, calm but fierce. "I gave 4 women the same opportunity," he began, his voice echoing through the marble hall. 4 black cards, 4 choices, but only one reminded me of something I'd forgotten. What humanity looks like. The women exchanged nervous glances. Vanessa forced a laugh. "Oh, come on, this isn't serious." "It is," Richard interrupted. "Because this experiment wasn't about money. It was about character." He gestured toward a large screen. Receipts appeared. Cynthia's from luxury stores, Vanessa's from designer boutiques, Marjorie's donation record. And then one small diner receipt, $8.47. "This," Richard said, pointing at it, "was the only purchase that meant something real." The room fell silent. While the rest of you bought comfort, image, or validation, she bought a stranger a meal. No cameras, no witnesses, no gain. "Just kindness," Cynthia scoffed. "So what? You're saying the maid wins your little morality game?" Richard looked directly at her. "No, I'm saying the maid reminded me I lost mine." A ripple went through the crowd. Elena stood quietly in the corner, confused, holding a tray. She hadn't been told this would happen. Richard turned to her. "Elena, would you come here, please?" She hesitated, then stepped forward slowly. "You didn't know this, but I've been testing people for years," he said, "trying to see who's real. And I kept finding disappointment until you." Tears welled in her eyes. "Sir, I didn't do anything special," she said. "Exactly," he replied. "And that's what makes it so powerful." He turned to the audience. "The world worships money, but money without meaning is just paper. This woman," He paused, voice breaking slightly. Reminded me that wealth isn't about what you can buy, it's about what you can give. The women looked down, uncomfortable. Vanessa's smirk was gone. Cynthia crossed her arms. Marjorie wiped a tear discreetly. Then, to everyone's shock, Richard stepped aside and gestured toward Elena. From this day on, Elena Brooks is no longer my maid. She's the director of my new foundation, one that will focus on helping working mothers rebuild their dreams. Gasps filled the room. Elena froze. Sir, You earned it, he said. Not because you spent less, but because you understood more. The applause began slowly, from one staff member, then another, until the whole room clapped. Reporters scribbled furiously. When the billionaire reviewed the receipts from the four women, he expected extravagance, designer heels, luxury bags, glittering jewelry. And yes, 3 of them delivered exactly that. Each card was maxed on vanity, each purchase screaming, I deserve this. But when his assistant placed the 4th folder, the Maid's, on his desk, something inside him shifted before he even opened it. The envelope was light, no stack of receipts, just a few slips neatly folded. Inside, groceries. Not just for herself, but for the staff quarters, for families who had overdue rent, for an orphanage listed under Children's Hope Foundation. She'd spent less than 1/10 of the limit. Her note at the bottom simply read, Sir, I didn't know if this was real, but if it was, I thought it should help where it's needed most. He sat back, speechless. The billionaire who'd built empires suddenly felt small in front of a woman who scrubbed his floors. All his life, he'd equated value with wealth, yet here was someone with none of it, teaching him the essence of richness. That single note changed everything. A week later, the maid received an envelope, not with termination papers as she feared, but an offer letter. Not for housekeeping. For managing his new foundation, Hearts Before Gold. She refused at first. Sir, I don't belong in offices like yours, but he smiled. That's exactly why you do. Over time, she grew into the role, overseeing donations, mentoring underprivileged girls, building scholarship programs. Her calm humility became the heartbeat of a movement she never imagined leading. The mansion where she once polished marble floors now hosted charity galas, and she was the guest of honor. Her story made headlines, but she avoided the spotlight. She always said the same thing to reporters. Money doesn't change people. It shows who they already are. The billionaire often quoted her in speeches. He'd built towers and businesses, but he called her his greatest investment. Years later, at a televised charity event, he surprised everyone by introducing her as co-chair of his global foundation. The cameras panned in, expecting her to say something grand. She just smiled softly and said, You don't need a black card to prove your worth. Just a clean heart. The audience stood in applause, not for wealth, but for grace. She still lived in a modest home, still cooked for her neighbors, still believed the best people were often unseen. But her impact? Unmistakable. And when the billionaire passed away years later, the will revealed something no one expected. He left the majority of his estate not to his relatives, but to the foundation she helped create. Today, her portrait hangs in the foundation's main office, not in silk or gold, but in a simple wooden frame. Beneath it, the inscription reads, The richest hearts aren't the ones that take. They're the ones that give. Her story became a quiet legend, whispered in classrooms, boardrooms, and kitchens, reminding everyone that integrity needs no audience. She had once been the maid who received a test card. Now she was the reason the billionaire believed in humanity again. Sometimes the poorest among us carry the wealth the world forgets to measure. Dear story lovers, if this moved you, hit that like button and tell us in the comments, what would you do if handed that black card?